Morning, Paul, and welcome to the Happier at Work podcast. Now, I want to do kind of a brief intro to you in the fact that we worked in the same place, but our paths never crossed. I think you joined in a head of UK and Ireland capacity right around the time that I was leaving. And I just thought that was interesting. And what prompted me to reach out to you in the first place was that I saw a post all about vulnerability that you had shared on LinkedIn, and it really resonated. And it's a really important and hot topic at the moment, and I would love to chat to you more about that. Do you want to give a brief introduction to listeners about who you are?
Sure, and look, it's a privilege. Thanks for talking to me. Yeah, so our ships didn't cross in the night, Aoife. I remember joining in March, but with a transition because I was living overseas and coming back to the UK. And I think I first got to Dublin that summer. So yeah, it's a shame that we didn't cross paths, but we have shared history. I was at Nielsen for 26 years in numerous different roles. I'm now Chief Commercial Officer at Consumer Intelligence. So Consumer Intelligence, we're an insight agency for the financial services industry. So providing insight that inspires confident decisions with the aim to build consumer trust. Very, very focused compared to my career at Nielsen, which was broad ranging in FMCG, CPG. So a little bit about myself. So I'm sat here just south of Oxford in the UK, and my family and I have been here now for almost 3 years. Prior to that, we had a good 11 years traversing most of Europe. So we've lived and I've worked in the Netherlands, in Turkey, in Russia, and much of Eastern Europe. And then prior to coming back to the UK, 5 years in Geneva, Switzerland. So it's nice to be home in many ways.
Yeah, absolutely. And I have kind of a similar journey myself in that I lived abroad for 7 years, which included 3.5 years in London. And I traveled all around Southeast Asia, and I lived in Australia for about 2.5 years in total between Perth and Sydney. And I traveled around South America, including Antarctica, on my way back before I got back to Dublin nearly 8 years ago now. But yeah, no, that kind of moving around and living abroad, I can absolutely relate to that. So the topic that we're talking about today is vulnerability, and I suppose maybe it's starting with, what does vulnerability actually mean to you?
Well, you know what? I think it's very personal, right? And so this conversation could go many ways. When I think about what it is you do and happier at work, it's important to start with, only I can make myself happy.
Mm.
And I think that's got a very big connection to the choice about vulnerability. Stating the obvious, we're human, and we have a very finite time where we need to make the most of it, and even more finite in our professional world. And so for me, vulnerability is really all about meaningful relationships. That's really easy with family and friends, I find. Um, but less easy in a professional capacity and at work, and maybe we can dig into that a little bit, because I've had my own journey about where I've been less comfortable and more comfortable at different times. I don't think vulnerability is about making friends or being this role model or forcing it. It's about opening up so other people can get to know you and you can get to know them, and then together you can grow a little bit better. This helping others is a theme. It's probably why I've been on the agency side of my professional life for my whole career. I like the ups and downs of trying to help others. And really that's been a buzz for me for as long as I can remember, whether it's, not quite sure I'm considered a business leader, but whether it's being in business, whether it's being a captain of a sports team, or way back, I mean, I used to teach karate to kids, and I was just a kid, and so that leadership position is not taken for granted, and I think vulnerability has been something I've always had, but it's only relatively recently that it's been okay to talk about it. So yeah, I'm not sure that's a great answer to your question, but it's so personal.
Yeah, no, I think you've touched on quite a few points there. I suppose the benefits of vulnerability being meaningful relationships, and how it's easier in a personal context than it is in a work context. So we can maybe dive into that in a bit more detail in a minute. And really the definition that came out is opening up so that people can really get to know you and you can get to know them. And I think that's it's a really nice way of describing it. And the fact that you've always maybe had it, but perhaps now that it's kind of more talked about, it's okay to share stuff a bit more freely. Maybe that's it. But I'd
Yeah,
love to talk about that journey. So if you always felt this sense of vulnerability, then how did that evolve over time? Especially, I
yeah,
suppose, in the work context.
yes, yeah. Well, I don't think it's always been okay from my perspective to be vulnerable, and I don't think that I'm now sharing because um, social media makes it okay. I don't think social media does make it okay. I,
Mm.
I think it also comes with a little bit of age and a few grey hairs, to be perfectly honest.
I can
You know,
relate
I'm
to
a
that.
father of three daughters. Um, they're of an age now that there is no way that their daddy is invulnerable and perfect. Far
Mm.
from it. And
Yeah,
I
yeah.
think that helps. Sometimes it's not as much fun as it could be, but I think that does help me realize that I need to be grounded. But let me try and kind of chart my own journey, and if it helps other people, then great. So, I mean, as a kid, I I have no skeletons in the cupboard and no great story about growing up and having great epiphanies. As a normal kid, working class background in Yorkshire. But I used to get incredibly nervous about things. In fact, I wrote about it on LinkedIn, and maybe that's an example. So I used to get nervous about stuff, but not to the point where it stopped me from doing stuff. This was all
Mhm.
in the basement. And my preparation for doing stuff was part of my routine. Um, so I did karate at an early age. I started at the age of 6. I finished at the age of 18. Um, but whenever it was like a grading or a big event, I was locked away in my own mind. You know, my parents, who were great, you know, they left me alone because that's what I wanted, but I needed to work out my own nerves. And you know, there were tears. This wasn't just I'm quietly nervous,
Yeah.
but I always did it. I always achieved, which
Mm.
the same with school. Incredibly, you know, I had a period where I didn't want to go to school without my preparation, and I did okay. And as I got older, I got more comfortable with that.
Mm.
But then when it came to work, and I think this is something that I want to share. I I found I was pretty good at connecting with people.
Mm.
Um, so obviously you don't go straight into your professional career as a people manager. I spent all my time training and wanting to be a journalist. That's what I wanted to be. I was interested in people. But when I got spat out of the system in the early 90s, it wasn't a great place to be. And so I found an affinity with insight and research, and with Nielsen at the age of 21. So I was curious. I was curious about people. And I think that level of curiosity um, just helped me relate to clients because I was asking them questions when other people were telling them stuff. But then I start to get positions of increasing responsibility. And here's where, when I reflect back, got really interesting because I had to be prepared. So I would spend a lot of time on my preparation. Again, I found myself going through the hierarchy of the business pretty well. Um, I was the youngest of this, level, and the youngest of this level, and doing okay. I played rugby. I captained a team that we set up, doing okay, but it was all preparation. Now, I've never been a perfectionist, so it's not that I can blame that. It was just about being well prepared to deliver to what I thought was my optimal performance level. It was only as I became a father way back in 2004 now, for the first time, but then a few years later, where I started to get some feedback that could turn into arrogance, which was really quite shocking for me, because
Yeah.
I've always faked confidence.
Okay.
So I would always describe myself as I'm not a confident person, but I know where to find confidence from. And I learned very quickly in my career that if you were not confident, you went to the back of the queue on a lot of things. And
Okay.
so this confidence building and this about practicing confidence could teeter over in overconfidence and arrogance. And it's feedback that came back from my peers. When you get these work feedbacks, Aoife, where it's like, what are the keep, start, stop? I always
I do.
got great feedback, but I always jumped to the what I should stop line.
Oh, yeah. Oh, absolutely. Agreed. Yeah, yeah.
Immediately, I'm in terms of kind of this profile, I'm kind of high D, high I. I am task driven and
Yeah, yeah.
want to achieve. And the feedback came up regularly that I did great stuff, but at my worst, I could be a little bit overconfident. And when I
Right.
used to read this, it used to shock me because,
Mm.
because I recognized it and it wasn't me.
Yeah. It's not how
And
you felt on the inside. Would that be fair to say? It's what you're
exactly,
really projecting on the outside. This is what I
exactly.
show to the external world. I'm this confident person because I have to be confident in order to succeed in the role that I'm in order to be considered for the next level, etc.
Right. And it was all very competitive, so I am a competitive person. So if I take that into my sport in time, I was far from the best rugby player, really far from. But I would make sure I was the fittest. I would tackle the most. I would do the job for others. And I there's a couple of stories to tell there. So when I played rugby a few years ago, one of the coaches just pulled me to one side and said, "Hey, Paul, I don't get this. In training, you're a monster. You're one of the fittest. You run the game. When it comes to game time, you're a lot quieter. You still do some of the jobs really well."
Mm.
And he hit the nail on the head. I didn't want to mess it up, so I wouldn't
Okay.
go too far. I wouldn't expose myself.
Yeah.
So we can dig into that. And um, I was lucky enough with my last company to be involved in quite a few leadership programs, heavy investment in leadership at the time of Nielsen. And so I went on a program with some peers, amazing peers, some people far better than me. And two things. One is I made a joke at the start of the program. We were all sat in these little kind of American high school desks. And I just made a joke because if you know the film Top Gun,
Oh, yeah. Yeah, yeah.
so
One of
remember
my
that
favorites,
scene?
the classic
Yeah,
of our
me too.
time.
I love it, right? So remember that scene and Maverick's twiddling his pen
Oh,
and he's
yeah.
looking around someone says, what's going on? And I did the same. I was joking and I just went, I'm just trying to work out who's the best. And I think half the room found it hilarious. So that was good for
Yeah.
my ego. But half
Yeah.
the room just thought I was an idiot. And I
Yeah. Yeah.
didn't
Yeah.
mean for that. It was a
Yeah.
joke. And in that very same program, we were lucky enough to be with Stanford faculty, and we got a coach for a period. And this coach, I'm always keen to be coached. I'm always keen to learn. And he said to me, we unpicked a few things. And then in one session, he said, let's talk about masks. And I was like, why? He said, well, let's talk about it. And he described the situation, and he said, look, this feeling to be the best, to be prepared, and of which you do, and your career tells me that. Um, tell me about it. And I just stopped and I said, his name's Michael, great guy. He's kind of West Coast American. And I just said to Michael, doesn't everyone do that? And he just went, no. And he said, I think it's exhausting being you, Paul.
Okay.
That was the moment. That was the moment where I went home. I had a long flight home, and I think I was living in, I can't remember where I was living. It was maybe Moscow, maybe in Switzerland. And I went home, and I shared with my wife, and she said, I've been telling you for years it must be tiring being you. And so that's the moment where really I just let myself off the hook a bit, and the vulnerability started to dial up.
It's really fascinating how that happened, and it took someone else to call it out for you, and this use of humor then was probably part of that mask. You're diffusing a situation where you feel uncomfortable by using humor or something like that. Yeah. So what sort of happened next? How did that evolve afterwards?
Around that time, and I don't think this is a coincidence, around that time I started reading around Stoic philosophy. And I'm not an expert, but Marcus Aurelius Meditations is my favorite book. It hasn't always been, but I have it next to my bed. I have a copy next to the toilet, and I have a copy downstairs, and I read it. And I must have read that book about 7 times now. And so what that led me to do is stay very grounded and practice. So interestingly, I took my intense preparation and applied it to being less prepared, which is crazy, right? But that helped me because some of the exercises that Michael and others and I'd read about shared with me was about just controlling the controllables and being okay not to be as prepared. So there was a couple of times, there was one time where we had a new global leader who was meeting, and I let it ride, and it was fine. Nothing bad happened. We kicked on. And so that got sequentially greater and greater to the point where I just felt much more benefit, not only for myself, but for those around me of being more myself, if you will. Yeah. And so there are lots of stories that I can share about where vulnerability, although it wasn't planned vulnerability, just were memorable highlights rather than the, yes, I nailed that, or I did the best, or I got that promotion. So those stories overtook the other stories, which I'm really comfortable with now. So that's how it progressed. And it progressed, I moved companies at the beginning of this year. Very vulnerable. I mean, I knew the culture of my past company and the people very, very well. But you don't have a choice but to be vulnerable in a new company. And I'm okay with that, really okay. So, now I'm a lot more aware of myself, but also a lot more aware of others.
Yeah.
I don't overshare though. That's still
yeah.
not
Well, I mean, that's another kind of interesting area, I suppose. But first, I'd love to explore what was the reaction of other people. Like, did you have any feedback from other people, be they peers or direct reports, about this kind of change? Like, was it that sudden of a change, or was it just you evolving and being able to be more of yourself?
It wasn't sudden. I didn't, it wasn't like suddenly I'd read a business book and suddenly came to work the next day different. It was because it has to be authentic, right? Yeah. So I was working on stuff myself to be better. So it was sequential. I think a good test of it, and people may call me out and say I read this wrong, was when I came back to the UK after being years away. This was the first place I joined. This was the business, and I was coming back as the managing director of UK and Ireland. I was thrilled. I felt like I just got the golden ticket in Charlie and the Chocolate Factory.
Absolutely.
And instead of being or preparing to be this big leader, I was different. I recognize it. And I don't know whether other people will know because they hadn't seen that journey, but I was surrounded by a leadership team who I just respected. You know, we were peers, and that's how I hoped that I came across. I think years before, I was required to by the business, but also myself to really pace set and set the agenda. And I felt a lot less pressure to do that because I was surrounded by people who I really enjoyed working with, who were smarter than me in many cases, probably all cases. And so that was very different for me. And that continues today, I hope.
Yeah, brilliant. Now, I love that approach. And I'd love to know if you have any thoughts, if someone is thinking of, I suppose, going on to that type of journey, like where or how do you get started if you want to feel like you want to remove the mask, if you want to be a bit more vulnerable at work, like how would you advise someone to start doing that?
I think people have to feel safe. You know, at the same time, I've worked with and experienced kind of people with proper mental health challenges and issues. I mean, we all have our own mental health issues. I do, and you know, you've got to feel safe, and it starts with yourself. It starts with, I mean, one of the best things I read was I had a period where I was reading The Chimp Paradox, if you know that book,
I do,
and
yeah.
and Viktor Frankl at the same time,
Search for
which
meaning, yeah.
blew my mind. And I think you've got to feel safe in yourself, and it's that inner confidence to say that, okay, I'm going to pick a moment, pick a series of events where I'm going to prepare a bit less, or I'm going to be open, deliberately open. And we are habitual animals, and that habit. Well, I found then that habit just grew and grew, and then you know, I don't feel like I'm able to give advice to others, but I was lucky enough to be in a leadership position. So I think I felt a huge responsibility for others. You
Yeah,
know, if the business I'm a leader of doesn't succeed, that affects people.
yeah,
Now, our shared company, my last company, got to the point where it was almost all about performance and kind of clients, and people became a long way behind. I'm in a very different situation now where people are put first. I always put people first,
yeah,
and I was responsible for people's rent and mortgages and children and social life. That's how I felt it. So I felt that what would I want from other people? So, you know, if someone there is thinking, how do I be, let's say, more vulnerable, more authentic, it's not about being more anything, it's about just being yourself a bit.
yeah, yeah,
And so you're not adding, you're kind of just taking away a few fences between you and
yeah,
whatever it is you're doing. There's way too much chest beating going on out there. I see it, especially from middle-aged white men, right? And it's unproductive. It doesn't
yeah,
help. And I think people should just care a bit less about how they are perceived
yeah,
and not worry, because at the end of the day, you're just good enough as you are. And that takes practice. I think if you're especially if you're in a place where you feel like you've got to be seen as something else, Aoife, um, stripping away rather than adding.
I really like that. And you said something earlier, which is kind of contrary. So we often talk about creating a psychologically safe environment at work. So it's okay for people to be themselves. But something in particular that you said was being safe in yourself.
Mm,
And I picked up on that and I really, really like that. So it's allowing that within yourself. It's exactly like you say. So stripping away all of those masks and feeling free to be able to be yourself rather than hiding behind. So it's not
mm,
adding something to the burden, it's actually taking stuff away. And there's less pressure. And going back to what you had said earlier about what your coach said, like, it must be exhausting being you. And so this takes a little bit of the pressure off. So I really like that. It's not focusing on necessarily creating this safe environment at work, but feeling safe in yourself to be able to do that. And I think as a leader, it's important to do that and to recognize that in ourselves. And what should come from that is creating a safe space for other people to be themselves as well. So it's kind of, it strips back, how do we create this psychologically safe environment at work? And that's for people who are in leadership positions to be safe, to feel safe with themselves, and to create that environment for other people.
I think you make a great point. Yeah. I mean, as a leader, you don't have to be the leader. You know, it's not about the CEO, but as a leader of other people, and it's whether you're seen as a role model or whether you've actually got people management responsibilities. If you're not yourself, people know.
Yeah.
Going back to the feedback that I got, people called it out. They know, and if you're not yourself, then you cannot expect others to be the same. You know, the more senior you get, I've said this all the time, the more senior you get, the funnier your jokes get. You know, the more timely people are in turning up for your meetings. And that's all false, right? But at the same time, as a leader, you are a buffer to what is going on out there for your team. And you said something that I want to pick up on about contradicting myself. I am full of contradictions. I do not operate this way. I don't spring out of bed at 4:30 and meditate and, you know, and take cold showers every day and do 10Ks every day. I'm full of contradictions. At my best, I can operate like this, and I can be grounded and stoic. At my worst, I still want to show up. I still want to be the best I can be. I hope that is more about for others rather than, you know, for myself, but it does start with yourself. And I think being content with yourself, no matter what, is probably the nirvana, right? I am far from there, right? I think we're all our biggest, worst critics, right?
Yeah, so, totally.
When I joined consumer intelligence, the CEO founder, Ian, a great individual and a big part of me joining, you know, we have a very good series of sessions to uncover how you work. And he asked me, how do you want feedback? How do you want that? And I said, be absolutely assured, if you've got constructive, negative feedback for me, I've already been there. I am my own worst critic, and so it helps, you know, sharing that helps learning about each other with a boss and how you can work that out. So that was a good process to do as well.
Yeah, that's a really great insight as well, that, like, because I think we all are our own worst critics, and to assure someone that, well, whatever you're thinking, I've probably been there already myself, so it's not going to be anything new to me. It's just something that you've identified as well as something that I need to work on. So really interesting. So it's about bringing this sense of vulnerability into the workplace. And something interesting you said there as well, Paul, about how we work together is kind of slight aside, but it's something I'm really interested in, is how people work effectively together. And something that I've been working on for a while, or at least I've said I've been working on it for a while. I looked at it in January, haven't had a chance to go back to it yet, but it's essentially a how to work with me guide. So it's for an individual to create for themselves, to understand how they work and how what motivates them, what maybe triggers them, and something that they can use as a tool to share with their managers, with their peers, in order to help understand each other better and how they work. So I really like that you kind of facilitated that conversation and said that it's an ongoing process. It's not just like, oh, here's everything about me. It's more of an ongoing conversation that you're having. So really like that approach.
Yeah, and you know, just to add to that, it's my opinion is that starts with the manager. It's the management, as management's got mixed up with leadership, but management is a profession.
Yeah.
And what it's probably a bit of a cliche, but from a management perspective, we need to treat people how they wanted to be treated. It used to say, "Oh, treat people how you would want to be treated."
Yeah,
No,
yeah.
it's not the
The
case. It's like
golden
they're
rule
different
versus
to
the
you.
platinum rule. That has come up
Yeah,
a lot in this last year. It's really funny. It seems to be popping up everywhere. But yeah, you're so right. Like you like we were brought up being told treat people how you would like to be
yeah,
treated. But now it's like, no, you treat people how they would like to be treated, and the focus is
yeah.
very much on the other person. Yeah.
So whereas I would say, and again, full of contradictions, where that period of my leadership career, I would say I was very much a chameleon. I would adapt to the situation and make sure the best self is put forward.
Mm.
How I've tried to change it is almost see others as the chameleon and try and kind of tap into what it is they're doing. So that's simply by getting to know them really well. One-on-ones. It's amazing how many people don't have one-on-ones with their team. It's crazy, right? One-on-ones weekly. Having feedback, giving them responsibility, watching them succeed and fail, and helping them and being there for them. I think a lot of people would get better relationships and better results if they did that.
Mm.
You mentioned something earlier about advice, and again, I'm loath to be advising, but one of the things that I found very helpful is, it's going to sound odd, is now I talk and write like me rather than like someone I think should talk and write like in my position.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
And I think, truth is a big word at the moment, whether it's around inclusivity or whether it's around the media, but from a business perspective, telling the truth is still something that I find odd that people have to debate. Now, there are some things that you may know information and you can't tell people at that time. That's a professional organization. That's fine, right?
Yeah.
But you can still say, yeah, I know, but I can't tell you right now because,
Yeah.
there are things that's confidential, or
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
okay. I see so many people skirt around that, throwing
Mm.
jargon, kind of
Yeah.
management phrases, and now it sounds just horrendous. And so telling that truth and avoiding all that jargon is
Yeah.
just, it's got to be the way forward, and do that with you at the center, your purpose at the center.
Yeah. Yeah. I like that. For me, it's what comes through from that is this idea of transparency. So listen, I do have the answers, but I can't share anything with you right now. And to me, that builds much better trust rather than leaving it all to the gossip that's going on. You're like, oh, he must know something, and he's not
Right,
telling us something, and the behind closed doors stuff.
right.
Something that we sort of began to touch on, or at least we mentioned, but we said we would come back to later, is this idea of the I suppose the boundary between being professional and showing a level of vulnerability.
Mm.
Any thoughts to share around that, and what does that look like for people who are trying to navigate this? I want to remove the mask. I want to be a bit more vulnerable. How
Yeah,
do I go
yeah.
about doing that without completely exposing myself?
I think we see this play out on a day-to-day basis on LinkedIn. I really do, and I think oversharing is a really personal thing. So
Mm.
I can't judge others, because what's oversharing for me may not be for you.
Yeah.
And so, I think it, within the realms of ethics and legality, I think it is a very, very broad spectrum, right?
Mm.
So I tend not to be specific about or share pictures of my family
Yeah.
in a professional realm. It doesn't mean that that's not important to me. It's hugely important to me, and I've seen other people do it with great effect. Whereas I will talk very openly about where, I think one of my LinkedIn posts was about sitting on the toilet for half an hour before I did anything. That's probably oversharing, right? Um, and so for me, I would say I wouldn't like to see the worry of oversharing to be a barrier.
Okay, yeah.
I think your audience will tell you that. And when I say audience, it could be the people in your peer group or the people in your organization or social media. Um, and if you're comfortable with what you're sharing and a proportion of your community or society thinks you're oversharing, maybe that's not your community.
Mm.
I have some very good contacts who are turning into friends who really share exactly how they are with their family and they are personally and their struggles on LinkedIn, and I applaud them. I am only 10% of what they are. I would rather that than the leader who talks about getting up at 4:30 on the morning and doing yoga and smashing their target by 400% and
Yeah.
posting a picture of their Porsche. I mean, it's just as unreal, right?
Yeah. It's
That's an
sharing.
exaggeration.
Yeah, share. Yeah, who is this person?
Yeah, they're
Really.
out there.
But it's, to me, what you're saying, it's more kind of about a fit or a match with the audience that you're trying to reach. And it's about sharing not only the good stuff, like I get up every day at 4:30, but when you're not able to get up at 4:30, that you're sharing that in a vulnerable way and saying, listen, I'm not having a great day
Yeah.
because of X, Y, and Z, and feeling safe in yourself to be able to say that, without worry, without judgment from other people. One thing I know, Brené Brown talks about this an awful lot, and she was quoted last week in or it might have even been a couple of weeks ago now, about this what is the um what's the border, I suppose, between between oversharing, if that's what we want to call it, versus vulnerability. And she talks about boundaries. So it's setting clear boundaries. And I think for each person, going back to what you said, for each person that boundary is going to be slightly different. And for each person, that's going to be, they need to clearly define that for themselves. Like, what is it that I want to do here? What is it that I want to share? You're not absolutely breaking down and sharing everything, maybe, about what's going on in your personal life in a work context, in a public forum, but you might share it with a manager, for example, or you might share it with one of your peers, or you might share it in a constructive way, in a kind of more of an open forum, saying, listen, I was going through this, and I'm through the other side now, so I just want to let you know that it's okay, and if anyone else is feeling that way, my door is open, you can come and speak to me about it, or something like that.
Yeah, I think you say it beautifully. Yeah, if I can relate to my experiences, I think to be vulnerable, it does take thought and preparation, right? It should not be an ad hoc thing. I remember one of my past managers sharing the analogy of the airline pilot with me, and saying, look, particularly if you're responsible for others, the last thing you want to see if you board that plane, it's probably a very strange story. Now, we haven't been on a plane for years.
Yeah. What's a plane?
Yeah, exactly. If you get on a plane, the last thing you want to see is being greeted by the pilot, and she or he's saying, oh, I've had a terrible morning, I'm not very confident, I'm not very good at this, and even if that's going through their head, you kind of don't need that. You that situational, you need, this person knows what they're doing, they've got the professional competence. But that doesn't take away from that there's a human in front of you. And so as I've got more senior, it hasn't been a case that I will, maybe there's a town hall, and the town halls at Nielsen that I used to run were big, there were hundreds of people. And I might have felt a little bit uncertain about something, but that's not the moment, right? But equally, if we have a session where we are sharing that it's okay not to be okay, and my God, this last 12 months has proven that is the case, then it's absolutely okay to share your personal stories, because you want other people to feel that not only are you in control of the things that will help them pay their mortgage and pay their bills, but you're also human and you're
Yeah.
accessible and
Yeah.
they're a little bit like you. And, you know, we've got to relate to each other that way. Yeah, it is situational. It takes thought and preparation, and
Yeah.
and very personal.
Yeah. Just a note that I put down there is that what I'm reading from what you're saying is that it's intentional. So you set out with the intention of doing it. And I love this idea of it being situational as well. So
Yeah,
when you're boarding the plane, exactly like you say, you're not, you don't want to create fear and panic in the people who are boarding the plane with you when you're supposed to be driving the plane. But equally, when you have a situation where you're talking about how it's okay, especially in the current situation with the global pandemic, that you create that safe space for other people to share their own experiences and their own vulnerabilities as well.
yeah, and I think that's reflective of my journey. I'm still not 100% comfortable with sharing myself. There are things that are kept for me and my family, or the moments where I'm silently battling with demons, which happens.
Yeah.
But I don't want anyone to confuse intentional with false.
Yes.
I think that intention has to come from a good place,
Yeah.
and the place that helps others grow. That's that. If you get into the realms of trying to be intentional and false, people will work you out, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, I think so. I think people can see right through that. So great to have you on the podcast today, Paul. Is there anything else that you'd like to share around your journey or vulnerability specifically?
I guess for me, it as I think about myself, it's all from a central point of seeing others grow. So that would be my conclusion. That's what makes me happier at work. To use your podcast, that's what I get it from, and where it's come from has probably traversed from just making other people happier with me so I get a return, to actually genuinely being happier with me so I can make others grow and be
Yeah.
happy.
Yeah.
So
I
that
like
would
that.
be my kind of unprepared sign off.
Well, you beat me, because the question I do normally ask people is what makes you happier at work, but you've beaten me to that
Oh, I'm
question.
sorry.
Answered it in a really nice way, though. So thank you so much for that, and thank you so much for your time today. If people want to reach out and connect with you, what is the best way that they can do that?
LinkedIn. Look, I think Paul Walker and Taggy, the consumer intelligence, or Nielsen, find me.
Yeah.
I do engage heavily on LinkedIn. Twitter, I'm a bit more sporadic. I don't have any fancy websites or anything, so I'm a simple human being.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for your time today. I really, really enjoyed that chat.
Thank you. Absolutely, my pleasure. I feel like I've been dug into a little bit, but if it helps someone, and then that's perfect. I'd love it. So, and I'd love to hear from
Feeling a bit
people.
vulnerable after that.
Yeah, I'm going to go have a coffee.
Brilliant. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Aoife.